I see you. I see.
I bring it down like.
I see you. I
Bring it
see.
down like.
Lofi Poli Sci, Michael Pickering bringing it down Lo-Fi Live with what's going on in the world today. And we're here with our good friend Gregory Day to talk about movies. And how are we doing out there, Gregory Day?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. It's good to be back here talking to you. It's good to hear your voice, sir.
Likewise, likewise. Yes, it's been about 2 months. And then I feel like we got quite a few new lo-fi listeners on the tunes, and they're gonna be like, what is this? What is this Gregory Day movie list thing? Well, they're about to find out. What top 10 movie list do you have for us today?
Yeah, typically I come on here where I talk about kind of weird and bizarre movies, and occasionally we take a little, we get a little scholarly sometimes with things. And so today is one of those days we got my scholar cap on, got my cup of Ethiopian coffee going here, and
Nice.
we're going to be talking about Martin Scorsese today. He's got a new movie coming out on Friday the 20th, so it felt appropriate to talk about to do a top 10 list focused on one filmmaker. But this is a little different than just like running down a top 10 list of our favorite films from him. I'm kind of taking a cue from him. Back in the 90s, he made this sort of what would maybe be called like a video essay today, with an educational video called A Personal Journey with Martin Scorsese through American movies. And he kind of touches upon the entire history of movies, American movies up to the time he started. And so I figured we'll do a top 10 list that is my personal journey through Martin Scorsese cinema and how it's kind of shaped me and impacted movies in general.
Sounds good. Sounds good. I think everyone gets where we're going with that. And so, like, real quick though, for individuals who aren't sure who Martin Scorsese is, because while for us, which we are old folks now, we know who Martin Scorsese is, but a lot of our
Yeah.
lo-fi
hmm
listeners, they don't come from the generation of Martin Scorsese. So
hmm
who is this? Without saying any of the names of movies, who is Martin Scorsese?
Yeah, I mean, he's arguably the greatest American filmmaker to ever live. He's been at the forefront of cinema for almost 50 years now. He is a professor, a preservationist of cinema. He loves to talk about the importance of visual literacy, and he makes very visceral, spiritual, uniquely American films. And his influence is kind of everywhere. And I think right now, he's very hot right now on the internet, even though he's 80 years old, about his opinions about the direction that cinema and American studio system is going, and that it's on its last leg, and it's some people consider controversial, but he's out there trying to make points to save this art form that he loves so much.
Yeah, we can talk about that at the end because I am aware of his latest comments out there on the internet,
hmm
and the controversy that's coming around it. But let's save that one for
Yeah,
the end, all right? So
absolutely.
so now people they know who Martin Scorsese is, they know what this top 10 list is about. Let's dive in. Why don't we go through some of Martin Scorsese's, some of your favorite Scorsese films? What do you got for number 10?
Yeah, so number 10, I'm going to be talking about the two films. We got a tie here for this one, but I thought they were important to put together because these two films illustrate the environment that made this man, where he's from, and how that influences his films. And we're talking about a documentary he made in 1974 called Italian American, and the narrative feature he made called Mean Streets. So Italian American is a documentary he made about his parents, who are first generation Italian um, Americans. Their parents came from Sicily, and Scorsese made this documentary just about his parents and how they interact, and how his mom makes the sauce, and how his dad doesn't like to talk a lot, and how these two get along. And he really shows, what it was like to be an Italian American in the 70s, having lived through the 50s and the 60s, and the differences in their generations. But also, it's really funny. His parents are you could really see how they created his personality, and what he takes from both of them. But the flip side to that is he makes this his breakthrough film, which was Mean Streets in 1973, which is about these low level guys trying to break into the mafia. One guy, it's about these two best friends, one guy who's completely out of control, who's played by Robert De Niro, and the main character who is struggling with his ability to be a leader, and kind of you know um, balance his spirituality with the things that he sees in the streets, and that person is played by Harvey Keitel. And so these two things, like his parents and then the environment he was from, living in Little Italy growing up, is depicted in this film Mean Streets. Seeing daily violence, seeing these guys live by this code, or people who try to get into that and maybe chewed up and spit out of it. And so these two types of films are the ones that really inform his background, and I think made him something different on the screen, because there are a lot of Italian American filmmakers before him, like Vincent Minnelli or Francis Ford Coppola, but they didn't really bring through their heritage into their cinema, and these two films are great examples of those.
I like this combo. Even though I was surprised, I was like, tie for number 10. I was like, here we go. But I like this combo. I've never seen either one of them, but I'll tell listeners right away, I'm very aware of who Martin Scorsese is. I've seen a lot of Scorsese films, so I never heard of Italian American, but I have most certainly heard of Mean Streets. And also to give people a bit of perspective too, especially newer lo-fi listeners, and their when we're talking about Italian Americans and this film in 1974, this was still very much an era to where Italian Americans were viewed, I mean, from the 70s all the way to the early 1900s as like the new immigrants in the US. There was a lot of discrimination against them. They were associated with gangs, they were associated with the mafia. Like if you were an Italian American, you were stereotyped right away and were like, oh, that must be a mafia person. And if that sounds familiar to stereotypes you hear about other immigrants today, it's true. It's just the immigrants that people do it to has shifted. But at this point in time, 50 years ago, I think it was great for Scorsese to, go into his own house, his own family, and say, like, look, these are my parents. They're Italian Americans. They are not mafia. And on the flip side, then he does a movie about Italian Americans being in the mafia and being horrible. So I like it's a weird dichotomy. And like I said, I never saw Italian American. It looked like a cool docuseries or a documentary. But Mean Streets, I'm really, really familiar with. Just I haven't seen it, and
Yeah,
it
I
made
think.
me.
Mhm.
Oh no, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like with Mean Streets, I think it's just like stuff he was observing every day, um, seeing these guys on the streets, and I love the juxtaposition of this film with his parents who did everything they could to keep his family out of that kind of business. The Italian American is a great example to break those stereotypes, to show working class Italian Americans, people who are not involved in organized crime, people who are just trying to get along in life, and yeah, they just work so well together.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And I think Mean Streets was also, it reminded me right away of your next film, but in a very different way. It's almost like
Hmm.
two different takes on the same thing.
Hmm.
And with that being said, I think a lot more people probably do know what your next film is. What do you have for number 9?
Yeah, so number 9 is a movie I want to get out of the way, and but I do think it has a lot of merits, and it's a great film. It's to me, it's almost like a flawless film. But I wanted to talk about Goodfellas, but I want to talk about it early, because Goodfellas, I think, has a reputation in different circles for different reasons. But Goodfellas is really a movie where Martin Scorsese changed cinema. It changed his career. It changed so much. And like Mean Streets, it's a film that plunges as deep as it can into the culture that it's in. And so it's a film that's not only a character study of its main character, Henry Hill, who was a real life um, gangster on the fringes of the mafia. And so it's sort of his life tale, but it's also like an encyclopedic um, tome of what it's like to be in that Italian crime family. It goes so deep into all these details about how the crimes work and just how it's sort of related to this culture that it comes from. But the thing about the movie that's kind of changed cinema is at the speed at which it moves. Like a lot of Scorsese's films are very fast paced, but this movie it runs from scene to scene to scene, without losing any of its impact. And it's 2.5 hours long, and it just moves it at a high speed to put you in the mind of someone who is seduced by this way of life. and that energy that it creates. And of course, it brings in the drug element and how that makes your life feel even like it's moving at a faster speed. Um, and so Scorsese has this gift of being able to immerse you or submerge you in all of this, all these feelings to make you feel like you are flying by the seat of your pants with these characters in this scenario. Um, and it doesn't have a traditional middle, beginning, and end. Actually, the movie actually begins in the middle of the movie. It takes you back to the beginning, takes you back to the middle, and then takes you to the end of the film, all while being self-aware with narration that's is kind of telling you as things happen, but they're being told to you from some sort of present, someone looking back on their life. And it's also like famous for a character who isn't really remorseful for his actions by the end. A lot of gangster films prior to this usually have some sort of moral grounding. That's once the bottom falls out on someone's life like this, they kind of have remorse, so they want to talk about go to schools and talk about things, keep people out of trouble. But this is a film where the main character is like, oh, I should have been better at this, otherwise things wouldn't have been the way they did. And so for a lot of ways, like you can see this film, many people ripped it off, like Boogie Nights and many biopics today all want to have this sort of Goodfellas feel to them. And he was the first to kind of create this new kind of narrative formula. And it's, it really is the film that launched him into being considered a critical master, even though he'd made many great films before this one. But this is the one that kind of changes the trajectory of his skill and makes his name a brand.
Yeah, this one I've seen a lot. I haven't seen it recently, but I know I've even seen it with you way long ago. And just let people know, so Goodfellas came out in 1990, right? And I think you're right for so many reasons. Like this movie, I think broke into, I mean, like mafia movies and some gangster movies were popular before, like Godfather and things like that, or Scarface. But I think this film like went a different direction, kind of, or just hit people in a different kind of way. And I think this film influenced so many other different films and TV shows later, but also like just culture about how we as society started thinking about the mafia, and at a time where the mafia itself was in decline, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess when this film came out, it was sort of in the height of the FBI taking it down, like the invention of the RICO Act, and I think it was kind of the height of the Gotti reign in New York, and so this was like during the last hurrah of the mafia at its heights, I would say.
Yeah, and I think this film, so I do love this film, but in the same way, at the same time, I can't watch this film anymore. Like just it's dragging down the character. And I think in a very real world like representation of like there's only one of two ways that this lifestyle ends, either in jail or dead.
Yes.
Like those are the two options here. And so this movie takes you on that journey, and it's like at first it's cool to watch it and you're into it all, but at the end, I think over time, as I've gotten older and as I watched it time and time again, it's like, God, this movie sucks. Like it's such a great movie, but you want to have, I like to have movies where you can get behind the main character and they win. And that does not happen with this movie. The main character is not a good person. The main character does not win. Like you're just like, damn. All right.
Yeah. But I think it's important to differentiate how people feel about this film, because there's certain circles who idealize this movie. They idealize the way that people live, and sort of neglect the other half of the movie, or the second half of the movie that kind of shows you the consequences of this life. But I think what Scorsese's fascination with it is what attracts people to this kind of life. And a lot of crime films and gangster films don't really show the seduction of a lifestyle like this. Like the opening line of this movie is, as far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster. And then it shows you the glamour and the facade of this lifestyle that seduces this man into this life. And when you're looking at it from his point of view, there is no downside. And he learns the hard way that there is a huge downside. to a life of crime. And so I think he's like one of the only filmmakers that, or at least he's not one of the only ones who does this, but he is one of the ones who pioneered wanting to show the duality to a lifestyle like this.
For sure, for sure. I definitely dig that, and he definitely achieves that for sure. But like you said, I think we get that one out of the way because that's probably the one a lot of people are most aware of.
Yeah, yeah.
But let's move to your number 8, and this is another one I am really well aware of. Just I've never seen. What is your number 8?
Cool, yeah. So he makes Goodfellas in 1990, but for the decade prior to that, it was a really rough decade for Scorsese and many artistic filmmakers in this country because the 80s American cinema moved towards commercialism in a big way. And so to kick off the 80s, he makes this film called The King of Comedy, and it's a 180 away from the tough masculine films that he had been known for. And it's a completely different kind of role for its star, Robert De Niro, who has been in many of Scorsese's films. In fact, they're very synonymous for working together in many of their movies. And so The King of Comedy is about celebrity obsession. And it's about this guy who wants to be a late night comic. However, he doesn't have the talent for it, and he doesn't have the drive to work at achieving his success. He wants to be able to slot himself straight in at the top. And his obsession is with a late night talk show host like Johnny Carson, except for it's played by Jerry Lewis in this film. And he does a fantastic job playing the sort of seasoned late night comic. And Robert De Niro's character becomes unhinged. Basically, he just gets obsessive to the point of where he is going to become dangerous and gets involved into a kidnapping plot to kidnap this comedian in order to get his chance to be on the show. And so this is a movie came out in 1982. This is right after the assassination of John Lennon. And we'll talk about another film that Scorsese made later on in this list, but he had made a film with Jodie Foster, and there was the entire thing with John Hinckley and his obsession with Jodie Foster to start that led him to try to assassinate Ronald Reagan. And so someone was touching on a lot of things going on at the time. It is a really funny film and it is a very engaging film, but it absolutely bombed the box office. Yeah, some critics liked it, but critics tore it apart. They did not like De Niro playing this weaselly role. They didn't like the turn away from sort of the types of films that Scorsese had previously made. And this was a huge setback for him because it was kind of paraded around as the bomb of the year, even though now it's been reappraised as being a great film. And I think it's a great film. And the Clash is in it. They're in one scene in New York. Sandra Bernhard is an excellent supporting role in the film. And at the time, yeah, it was just such a tough film for him to overcome. I think it's important to look back at some of the older films he made, not just his greatest hits of gangster films, because there are these sorts of gems like this one that are in his filmography.
So like I said, I'd never seen this one, but I automatically, like, I knew it. And then I was watching the trailer and I was like, that newer DC movie that Robert De Niro is in, The Joker, that seems like a complete ripoff of this movie in a kind of way. Is it? I mean, I've never seen King of Comedy, but the plot of The Joker and even having De Niro in it, it kind of seems like it borrows.
It does. Yeah, I haven't seen it either, but I know it borrows heavily from this film and from another film that we're going to talk about later. Both of those movies kind of inform most of what happens in that movie.
Yeah, and that's interesting because, like, so this movie you said was a box office bomb.
Yeah.
The Joker made over $1 billion using much of the same movie. I mean, so yeah, Scorsese, 30 years, 40 years later. No, it's about 40 years later. His work is still being revisited.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep going. What's this number 7? And we've talked about this one before.
Yeah, if we did, I don't recall when, but yeah, this is a favorite of mine. I love this movie. But this, like I just said in the previous one, the 80s were like really rough for Scorsese. And so he comes off of King of Comedy and he tries to get another film made a film that's very close and near and dear to his heart, and he gets up to the finish line of pre-production, and then everything gets um, yanked out from beneath him. I'm going to talk a little bit about more what that film is later, but he's really at the lowest point of his life. He has no idea what he's doing. He's kind of questioning himself in his artistic choices and whether he has the sand to continue on in this career. And so he gets this script called After Hours delivered to him, and it kind of makes him want to find his way again into making a quick, fast movie. And so he makes this incredible comedy about a yuppie who goes out to Soho for one night to try to get laid, and it becomes like a Kafka-esque nightmare for him to try to get out of Soho. And it takes place in one night, and he just can't get out. And everyone he meets is after him, and things just keep escalating and escalating and escalating. And it's one of the great like run all night comedies ever made. And really, to Scorsese, it's just him rebuilding all of his fortitude into making films. And even though it's a comedy, it's got all of his great trademarks, all of his camera movements, all of his like rapid editing, and it's laugh out loud funny. But it's really a film, if you look at it from his point of view, about responding to rejection, just trying to persevere through all of these things, constantly trying to knock you down. Yeah, this is one of those like real hidden gems that's kind of surfaced over the last number of years. You just got a 4K release, restoration and release from the Criterion Collection this year. It's steeped in like the punk scene of the 80s as well, and so sort of time capsule of a city that doesn't exist, or the parts of the city that don't exist anymore. And yeah, so I would highly recommend, if you haven't seen any of the films on this list and you want to watch a wild and crazy New York movie, this would be the one that I would highly recommend.
I think I echo that. Even though I never saw it, this trailer was crazy funny, and it like, as much as I dislike the 1980s, and for those who've never heard me say it, hear me say it, I dislike the 1980s. There was nothing fun about it except for maybe a few cartoons. Anyway, moving on. But I think this movie represented what was at least kind of funny about the 1980s and some cool stuff about it. So I'm into checking this one out. You definitely caught me with it for sure. Well, where are we going for number 6? I think people may know about this next one. What do we got?
Yeah, I certainly hope so. So we're gonna jump far into the future from where we previously were, and there's a lot to cover between there. But I want to jump to the 21st century because I think Scorsese's entered a new phase of his career post the 90s, and a lot of the films he has been making in recent memory have all been historical dramas. And one of my personal favorites that I wanted to put on this list is The Aviator from 2004, because I think it's a spectacular movie that covers a lot of ground, a lot of history, and is just one of the finest directed films, I think, of my lifetime. It's about Howard Hughes, who had many different professional endeavors in his life. He was rich, and he was born rich, and so he invested his money in aviation, and he invested his money in films in Hollywood. And so he really wanted to break into this. He wanted to be this mega celebrity, not too different from your Elon Musks of our time, but at a much bigger in a much bigger way. And so this is a film starring Leonardo DiCaprio. This is their second film they made together. And he stars as Howard Hughes, who this film kind of captures just a snippet of his life, which is like the 30s through the 50s. So it doesn't really talk about Howard Hughes later in life, but Howard Hughes famously suffered from OCD, and that went untreated in his life, and it really caused his life to spiral out of control, especially during a time period when people did not publicly address their mental illnesses, and and could be ostracized for them. And so he also wasn't the greatest person. I mean, he was a womanizer, and he was, I believe, he was anti-Semitic, and I think he was also anti-Italian for many different things that he did in his life. He was also a product of his time. But this film is about someone it's almost an Icarus story. It's about someone trying to fly as high as they can in cinema, taking on the studios, the richest people in this industry, taking on the richest people in the aviation world, and then of course all this comes sort of crashing down as the government steps in to look at his finances and his lifestyles and everything. And DiCaprio does such a fantastic job playing this guy who has such broad ambition yet has these extreme weaknesses. And so it's really a film where you see DiCaprio switch over from being the youth idol of cinema into taking on more mature adult roles. And it's such a fantastic movie.
Yeah, I saw this movie once, and it was massive when it came out, really.
Mhm.
And let me just say that when Leo starts peeing in jars, I realized that's how I felt about this movie. That I am not a Leo fan. I'm not a fan of this movie. I was like, no, no. I was like, it gave me such a headache. And
Mhm.
I think that's partly deliberate on Scorsese's part, right? To show, like, especially how you said, like, he suffered from OCD and it went untreated, and mental illness, when goes untreated, like it can lead you to spiral out of control. And if you try to capture that in film from that person's perspective, it's like a whirlwind. And
Yes.
I think Scorsese did a great job of portraying that.
Mhm.
And despite the fact that I'm not a Leo fan, like, I think this is it's a great
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah, I will say, like, Scorsese doesn't necessarily have OCD, but I think Scorsese has been very open about his anxiety, and the life choices he had made over the course of his career. He was severely into cocaine for a while when he was rocketed into celebrity in the 70s, and a lot of those things, his insecurities got the better of him, and there were times when he had very famous breakups with the women in his life, and he could not muster the strength to get out of bed or leave the house or to feel like he could be seen by other people. And he had been hospitalized for that at one point for just complete exhaustion. And I think he is able to take the experience and translated to the screen in many different ways and across all these movies we're kind of talking about. But this one particularly, with Howard Hughes' inability to move past his mental health, really comes through here, and he really feels like someone who could put their experiences on the screen to make it feel genuine.
I think that definitely comes through. It really does.
Yeah.
So, like I said, a great movie, despite the fact I don't like the lead role. But anyway, it's not like we're gonna have
Yeah.
to talk about him again or anything. What do you have coming in at number 5, my friend?
Yeah. So number 5, we just started talking about his historical dramas that he was making, but previous to the 21st century, he was kind of making contemporary movies, even though Goodfellas is a film set in 20 years before it was made. But the movie that really shocked the world that he made, well, I wouldn't say like shocked the world in a way that like people like it changed everything, but it shocked the world that he, as a filmmaker, would have made this film, is The Age of Innocence from 1993. It's an adaptation of an Edith Wharton novel about New York at the end of the 19th century. And it's one of those requited love stories between a man who's married and a woman who is, I believe, the cousin of his wife, who's also in a crumbling marriage, and he is in love with her. They're really in love, but he can't find the strength to leave his marriage because of what the social backlash he's going to get from that. And it's like a drama of a very mannered drama in this high society world in New York City. But coming from Scorsese, it's like looking back at the history of the city that he's from, looking at a specific time period that sort of many consider to be the birth of the great city. It's on the cusp of really taking off in the early 1900s. And he takes a lot of inspiration in this film from paintings and changes his style a little bit slower. Instead of fast cuts, there's a lot of transitions. And so, or a lot of like fades and things in the way that the editing works. And so it sets you into sort of a feeling of a different time, the way different things, the speed of a different time, I should say. And it doesn't have the same exact speed as our contemporary times. And this is his first collaboration with Daniel Day-Lewis in the lead, and Michelle Pfeiffer's excellent in the film as well. And I think this film shows, how much of a artist he really is. This is the film that he followed, like his first major film after Goodfellas. He made a film between the two of these, but this is like a great juxtaposition of a film that's as fast as possible about the speed of a life of crime, and then the slower film about high society, during the Gilded Age.
I saw this one a long time ago, and seeing the trailer again reminded me of several things. One is that, like, I think almost all of Scorsese's movies, and not all of them, there are some exceptions, but they're almost all dramas and pretty long dramas.
Mm-hmm.
And in seeing Daniel Day-Lewis, I'm like, that reminds me, and there's something we'll talk about later, I'll ask you about, but man, Scorsese likes to use the same actors and actresses. And I was like, but you're right. This movie is a big juxtaposition against, his crime thrillers or his mafia
Mm-hmm.
movies. And this one's a love story. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a tangled one. It's a love story about two people who are married. So it's like an affair story. So
Yeah.
it's like, in some ways, I think it's a conversation of saying this is nothing new. It's been
Mm-hmm.
happening for a long time. Unhappy marriages and love is complicated. But I think in another way, it's an important film for Scorsese to demonstrate that he is more than just Goodfellas now. Like,
Yeah.
because just a couple years before, and I don't know the film that came in between, but I imagined
Mm-hmm.
after Goodfellas, Scorsese was like painted as the mafia director. And this one I think is important because it shows that, like, hey, I'm more than just that. I can do something else.
Yeah, yeah. He talks a lot about in this particular film that the violence in it is unspoken. It's the emotional violence that the society is enacting upon these characters. So I think it's interesting that he finds the film itself to be violent, but in a different kind of way. But yeah, I don't know, his depiction as being a mafia director, I think really took off with Casino, because between Mean Streets, which was made in '73, he didn't make another mafia film until Goodfellas in 1990. Then he makes Casino in '95. So I think that's the third time he kind of makes a film like that. And so that's where that really takes off.
Gotcha,
Um,
gotcha.
but just for context, between Goodfellas and The Age of Innocence, he made the Cape Fear remake, which is something I can touch upon here in a little bit. But yeah, I think him still trying to find what is this place. Like, he made this mafia film, and is this going to define his rest of his career? And so here he is making this drama that no one saw him doing, because it's the least masculine of his films. One of the most emotional moments of the movie is someone taking off their glove and touching hand to hand for the first time, their skin actually touching, and it's such a delicate touch that he has in this film that I think it really shocked a lot of critics, that they didn't think that this guy who's known for his brutal masculine films was able to make a movie like this.
I dig that. I dig that. And it really goes to show how important this film was for him and his filmography, without a doubt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, why don't you take us to our number 4, which is quite a departure from that one.
Yes, it is. So I want to talk about Scorsese making pure entertainment. His films are highly influential on many number of other filmmakers, but I think his style, the way he moves the camera, the way he edits, the pacing of his films has a really broad influence across all filmmakers that have followed him. But when he wants to make just a movie that's purely entertainment, his style really takes off. And to me, the best film that he's made in this way is The Departed from 2006. This is a movie that I find endlessly watchable. I know you're probably going to disagree with the lead of the film, or your opinion on the lead of the film, but I think, like, just watching a fun cops and robbers movie made for adults that's ultra violent, it's once you get hooked on the thread of this movie, like boom, 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 things just happening, and you just get carried away with the plot. And it's really wild that this kind of film, of all of the great movies has made about different subject matters, especially his films about spirituality, or the seduction of lives of crime, or these deep character studies he's made, this is the film that got him the most critical and award praise of his career. This is the film where he finally won an Oscar for Best Director. He won an Oscar for Best Picture. But it's just pure old-fashioned, down and dirty entertainment. And it pays a lot of homage to the gangster films of the 30s. And yeah, I think the other film that's sort of like this is the film we were talking about was Cape Fear, where Cape Fear is a remake of a 60s thriller. And it's about a criminal who gets out, who doesn't think that his lawyer did enough to get him off of a rape charge. And now he's getting out of jail and he wants revenge on the lawyer. But even in that film, there's a lot of things that Scorsese brought to that movie that's mining the idea of revenge and dissecting middle class American marriages and the institutions of marriages in general. Like, it's got a lot of other things beneath the surface of it in the subtext. But The Departed, on the other hand, is just a fucking blast from start to finish every time you watch it. So I mean, it's almost 20 years old at this point, and it hasn't, other than some technology and things in the film, like, it really hasn't aged at all.
Yeah, so out of all that, I'm going to give people, in case they haven't seen it, the brief synopsis, because you talked about the
Oh,
film
sure.
without telling anyone what the film is
Sure, yeah.
about. So the film's leads are Leonardo DiCaprio, which was why Gregory Day was like, I bet you don't like this one. But playing across from Leo is Jack Nicholson, and there's like a slew of other people. And for me, Jack Nicholson saves this movie for me.
Yeah.
But so you have cops, the Boston State Police versus the Irish Mafia.
Mhm.
And the state police put a undercover in the Irish Mafia, and the Irish Mafia have a rat in the Boston State Police. So it's just like cat and mouse between the two, and it explodes. And I think you are right that this film is a ride, and it is my favorite of his films without a doubt, regardless of Leo being in it. There's so many really great people in this film, and I think out of the entire list, this film is probably the most accessible to people today. Like, it's still fresh.
Oh yeah, for sure. Matt Damon is
right. Matt Damon's in it. There's a slew of people. Wahlberg is in it. So I mean, I think this is deservingly at the top end of your list, even though Leo was in the movie.
Yeah, and I think it's appropriate now to just kind of bring up, like, if you've never seen a Scorsese film, like, he's known for fast editing, freeze frames, constantly moving camera, and that's sort of his. He has so many different things he uses. He can use slow motion at times, very effectively. But I think those tools that I just mentioned are the things that really take off and make it a party just move at 180 miles an hour.
Yeah, and Flog and Molly music here and there throughout the movie helps as well.
Yes,
the soundtrack of that one is like really, really, really good. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
All right, where are we going for number 3, my friend?
Yeah, number 3 is a film. Another really a big favorite of mine is called Bringing Out the Dead. And this one's sort of going to be related to the next pick on this. But Scorsese's kind of hailed as a guy who makes two types of films, even though his entire filmography is very eclectic. He either makes gangster films or he makes films about spirituality. And he's made, even in some of his gangster films, especially Mean Streets, he delves into spirituality. He is a Catholic, but the way he's trying to mine, like, how you toe the line in this world, how you how do you live a life, in servitude of the mission of your God or whatnot. But he finds this film called Bringing Out the Dead, which is about an ambulance driver who is having a moment of crisis over his job because someone like him gets into this job to save lives. But he's so burned out working in New York City overnight that he thinks that his job now is to escort the dead into the afterlife, to be a witness to the death. And this is a film about great struggle of like trying to find your compassion in witnessing death. And it's set in this wild world of the end of the 90s or the early 90s, excuse me, before Giuliani cleaned up the city. And so there's a lot of drugs, a lot of violence, a lot of homelessness in the city. And it's starts Nicolas Cage as this ambulance driver who's, I think it's set over 3 nights, where he has to be witness to the horrible things happening in the city and whether he actually has the ability to save anybody, or is his real mission in life to be the witness and help people die with dignity. And this movie was a huge flop, even though if you watch the trailer, it looks spectacular, and it is spectacular. And it's not a false note in the entire film, but no one really wants to see a movie about compassion. They want to see movies about many different other emotions, and compassion is a hard one to ask people to get on board with. And I think that's the reason this movie didn't really succeed at the box office, but it's such a great film, and it's got a great soundtrack. You want to talk about soundtracks, which is something we haven't talked about at all, is that every single Scorsese film has an incredible soundtrack, whether it's a score or it's pre-existing music that he uses. But in this film, it's like he uses the Clash again to really amp up the speed at which the city moves, or he uses REM and some other 90s contemporary songs to kind of set the
REM. I haven't thought about
yeah.
that in a long time.
Yeah, well, I think those are a little more used a little more to get the mood,
Right.
or the time frame, because it's in the early 90s. But I will say there's a really great scene in this film set to Red Wine, the UB40 song from the late 80s, I believe, or early 90s, I can't remember. That takes place in a drug dealer's apartment that he has to go into, and it just fits the mood so well. And he's just a master at picking songs. And so check this one out. It's if you haven't seen it, it's a spectacular film.
This is one I have not seen, but this is one we have talked about. And I remember talking about it with you. I don't remember which list it was, but I told you then, and I will tell you now, I want to see this movie. The trailer looks amazing. It looks like Nicolas Cage at his best. And the whole idea of an ambulance driver, a medic, an EMT, is supposed to be about saving people's lives. And this one suddenly has a transition to think that he's supposed to witness people dying. And it's like, no, you're not. You're supposed to save people, all right?
Yeah.
But it's like crazy. And because like you said, and for like a lot of newer lo-fi listeners, and they're like, well, New York in the early 90s and Giuliani, what are you talking about? People know Giuliani of today from something very, very different.
Yes.
Giuliani was a mayor of New York, but in the 1980s, New York was a very, very different place. The crack cocaine epidemic was going on. The heroin epidemic was going on. I mean, like, people talk about the opioid epidemic. That's illegal drugs. We're talking about the heyday of crack and heroin coming into the United States, and like international drug cartels. I mean, like, the 80s were crazy for New York. And an ambulance driver following them at their overnight shift in New York City with that backdrop, that's fascinating to me. And that, I think, sells me on the idea of why an ambulance driver could then start seeing themselves as someone who carries souls to the other side, rather than someone who is supposed to save lives. Because at that point in time in New York, there was so much death going on.
Yeah, I think for big context, like the late 60s through the 80s, all the way to the end of the 80s, like New York was defunded, and it was just like, abandoned buildings and rampant crime, and just a very dangerous place compared to today, where we have the Disneyfication of Times Square, and it's very clean, and there's a lot of initiatives to turn that city around, for good or bad. And I know a lot of people have different opinions about the cleaning up of the city, but this film really makes you feel, and we're going to talk about another film at the end of this list too, that makes you feel the absolute danger of what this city was capable of during that time period.
Yeah, without a doubt. And And I think, like you said, and I'll agree with you, like without getting into any of our opinions about what's happening to New York today, New York is a far safer
Mm.
place than it used to be in the 1980s and
Yes.
before.
Yes.
Without a doubt, without a
Mhm.
doubt.
Yeah.
But let's carry into your number two, because I think you're right with the whole spirituality thing, and this is one I had never even heard of. My friend, take it away.
Oh, really? All right. Yeah. So to get to the heart of Scorsese's films about spirituality, he has made many movies about um, the search for meaning and spirituality, and he has made most recently he made that film Silence with Andrew Garfield and Adam Driver about the Jesuit priests in Japan. That's excellent.
Oh,
About priests trying to
snooze
find,
fest, whatever.
yes, trying to find a priest's meaning in this foreign land. And then he's made Kundun, which I think is an excellent film as well. It doesn't get enough attention. His film about the Dalai Lama. Um, and this film is to me his best film he's made that's directly about spirituality. It's The Last Temptation of Christ from 1988. It's an adaptation of a novel written about the life of Christ. So it's not based on the actual scriptures. And it even has a disclaimer at the beginning of the movie that this movie is not based on the Bible. Because I'm going to get into this a lot to talk about here. The novel is an exploration of Jesus as a man and him dealing with being a man, not him, and how he's going to overcome that to, become God, or or how he's going to balance these two things. But if he's supposed to be 100% human and 100% God, then how is he supposed to overcome the things that every man is susceptible to? And so, this is it kind of reworks things even in the novel. And so he's a carpenter, but he builds crosses for the Romans and that they use to execute people on. And he's got this terrible pain in his head, and he has to go on a journey to figure out that this is the way that God is communicating with him. These migraines, like he describes them as these like eagle claws through his brain. And so he has to go on this journey to where he kind of realizes that he is not listening until he starts to, and then he starts to talk, and he starts to gain a following, and and we know the rest of the story after that. But Scorsese takes his film and he 100% puts every ounce of his being into the tale of this man's journey, played by Willem Dafoe, who just does a hell of a job. And I'm not someone who is religious. I don't follow any of the teachings that come through Christianity, but this film really is very effective in showing the struggles of this person to try to do the right thing, to try to lead people to a better life, to try to lead people out from tyranny and offer them equality. There's so many great scenes in the film with him saving Mary from being stoned, or his constant arguments with Judas, not Judas, excuse me, yes, with Judas, who's played by Harvey Keitel. And Judas is the one who's keeping him in check to toe the line of the revolution against the Romans. But the thing about the film that's very controversial is that, and this isn't really a spoiler because it's in the title, it's The Last Temptation of Christ. The Last Temptation in the film is he's gone through all these trials, he's about to be crucified, and an angel comes down to him and tells him, "You're not really the Son of God. You don't have to die this way." And so he is tempted with leaving the cross, turning his back on everything, and living a life as a normal man. And there are scenes depicted in this movie and in the book of Jesus having sex and having a married life and having kids. And this did not go over well with a lot of people in the world. And
Yeah,
when
I imagine it didn't.
he tried to make this movie after the King of Comedy, and there were protests. There were just as he was trying to make the film, people were up in arms, and so that's what caused that movie to be aborted before it even got to production, and led him down a dark path that led to the After Hours. But he finally gets this movie made. He shoots it in Morocco, and David Bowie's in the film. He plays Pontius Pilate, and it's got Peter Gabriel did the soundtrack, and it is a phenomenal movie. But when it opens, it's utter chaos. Like the protests, there are bomb threats, there are people, there's violence at the cinemas this movie comes out in. and all those things really overshadowed the movie. But I think in recent time, it's gotten a reappraisal in the last 10 or 20 years, and it's gotten the respect it deserves, because it's not just some propaganda Christian film. It's a film about how you how you persevere towards your ideals, how you try to do the right thing, and how you are able to balance your spirituality with the way the world is. And the world is, a very difficult place to live in. So um, not much has changed since the world that's depicted in this movie. And it's a fantastic movie. And I think if you're a Willem Dafoe fan, he does a hell of a job in this movie. And yeah, I can't recommend this film enough. And it's very powerful. And I consider it to be one of his 5 best films that he's made.
Yeah, I had never heard of this one, but when I watched the trailer, I could immediately see that, oh, this must have caused such an uproar in the country. Like,
Mhm.
I think if this movie came out today, it would cause a major uproar in the
Mhm.
country.
Yes.
Like, correct me if I'm wrong. I might have seen it wrong, but it looked like in the trailer too that Jesus was even kissing a man at one point. Does that actually happen, or did I see like wrong in the trailer?
No, he does. I think. I think the scene that's in the trailer is when Judas kisses him,
Okay,
um, which
but
is
still,
in
the
the
idea
yeah,
of Jesus kissing another man
yeah,
full on the
yeah,
lips, if that
yeah,
came out in a movie today,
mhm,
this country that we live in would lose its
yeah,
block. Like,
yeah. Well, that shouldn't have anything to complain about, because that's in the Bible. Like, Judas kisses him. That's how he identifies him to the Romans.
yeah,
But
I
I don't
imagine
doubt it
like
would. Yeah, yeah,
you don't hear many people talking about it
yeah.
though, right? That's
Sure.
that's my
Yeah, yeah,
point.
yeah, yeah,
Um, Man, I could have just imagined during the Ronald Reagan era of the
yeah.
1980s, this film
Hmm.
comes out.
Yeah.
And yeah, I could imagine all the backlash he got leading him towards a dark
Hmm.
place
Yeah.
for sure. And craziness. I definitely, I may not check this one out next, but I'll definitely, I'll put it on my list for interesting movies worth giving a chance to.
Oh yeah.
But why don't you take us to your, what I would say, not unexpected number ones? Take it away, my
Yeah,
friend.
yeah. So number one is also a tie, because what I really want to talk about is his greatest strength as an artist is that he has the uncanny ability to create films that are told solely through the character's subjectivity. And we see this time and time again in his films. Goodfellas being one of the earliest films he made in this way, but even in Wolf of Wall Street or in The Aviator, he has a really strong ability to put you in the mind of its central character, and you see the world from that person's perspective. And 2 of his greatest films do this better than any other films ever done this. It's Taxi Driver from 1976 and Raging Bull from 1980. Taxi Driver, which we had just talked around in the conversation about Joker and the
Right,
King of
right.
Comedy, is about a Vietnam vet who can't sleep, who's a taxi driver at night in the mid 70s in New York. And he is driving around in the worst parts of the world at this time, like the crime, the lawlessness, the dirty quality of the city. It's unkempt, so like there's no law, it feels like, and he is spiraling out of control. And I think Scorsese's even talked about today, like he feels like this film so prophetic to today, where the main character of Travis Bickle, played by Robert De Niro, um, he could see in all these mass shooters, these people who were isolated from society. And Travis Bickle's a character who every person he tries to reach out to in the movie rejects him, or can't connect with him. And so he ultimately decides he's going to choose violence as a outlet for his loneliness, to do something. And that unfortunately is something that's very prevalent in our society today. But the movie puts you in his point of view, like the way you see the other people in New York, the way you see women from his point of view, the way you see um, the black population. It puts you, in the way that he thinks, and it makes you uncomfortable. And Raging Bull, on the other hand, is a film that is about an immensely insecure individual who's a boxer, and the violence in the ring is only an outlet for him to get over his insecurities in his life outside of the ring, which involves being, trying to be controlled and manipulated by the mafia, as well as his inadequacies with the women in his life. And Raging Bull is the film that really had to, one of the resets of his career, because this is the film he made when he crashed and burned with his anxieties and his drug abuse in Hollywood in the 70s. And this sort of a reset for him to come back and make an artful black and white film about a boxer. But all the violence in the film and the way that this character just sort of brutalizes his own family and the women in his life, and his opponents are just an outlet for this guy. And it doesn't make him any better. So you're thinking, you're putting this mindset of this person who's only getting worse and worse and worse over the course of the film. Yet Scorsese has this ability to make you sympathetic to them. No matter how awful they are, there's some sort of relatability to this character. And he does this better than anyone else. And he uses all the tools of cinema, whether it's slow motion or fast cutting or tracking shots. He utilizes all these tools to put you in their mindset. And as an audience member, you can't escape that mindset. So it has a profound effect on you, whereas lots of other films just can never reach this level of getting into your mind this way. And so these two, without a doubt, have to be number one.
Okay, let me start off by saying I've seen both of these films, and you're correct about one and you're incorrect about the other. Which one do you think I think should be number one?
I think you say Taxi Driver.
You are correct, sir. How dare you put a sports movie as number one on the Scorsese list?
That movie's not about sports, sir.
I know it's not. But I've only seen Raging Bull once. It was a long time ago, and I remember it being good. But compared to Taxi Driver, like that, I've seen multiple times, and I think even 50 years later, goodness, this movie still plays into what's going on today, and it makes me feel like we have not learned anything as a country, as a species. Like, really, we've been talking and doing these same things over and over and over again and expecting different results, and Taxi Driver brings you down a path and a journey that I think is a little more relatable than Raging Bull and a boxer and a sports movie. Although, sorry, not a sports movie, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
So I think for me, Taxi Driver is a little more accessible and relatable too, even though I think it may be even more far-fetched in some ways. In some other ways, it may not be. But I think you are right. These are his the two crowning jewels in his tiara of filmography, if you will. I think without a doubt, these are the two that, and when you think of all Scorsese, these are probably people's one and two. Although you did mention previously Wolf of Wall Street, and I think a lot of people know that one more currently and put that one pretty high as well.
Sure.
But I completely agree with not having it on the list as well, compared to these other ones. Like you have a top 10 list, that's a top 12 list, really. So no, I dig it. I think you're right with Taxi Driver and Raging Bull. But I mean, that being said, so your top 10 list is a top 12 list. It means it was hard. It was really hard to make this list. I could not imagine how you actually had to pull back and forth from yourself. With that being said, did you have an honorable mention, like lucky number 13? Was there anything that you almost put on, but you just couldn't quite fit to it?
Yeah, he has so many films that I really wanted to talk about. But some of them have similarities and things, but one thing that we can't talk about a lot because there's not really a film about them is Scorsese as the educator, because he does a lot of restorations on films. He has the film archive that he has started where he is actively restoring films. He talks about the preservation of movies. He talks about the importance of making sure films are available to watch. He's out there right now fighting to keep Turner Classic Movies alive so that people can watch movies from other eras and learn from them and study them. He does talks on these things. And so the one film that I think is worth mentioning as an honorable mention is the film that I mentioned at the top of this list inspired this list is his personal journey through American movies, and it's come out in 1995, and it's quite long. It was made for television, and so I think it's 4 to 6 hours long. But
Ooh.
it's different episodes, so like it aired I think over 3 nights or something. Um, and so but he takes you from the silent era through the 70s, and he talks about these different avenues of films and the different things that happened in the history of cinema, and how it changed and how it influenced him. And you see a lot of the through line of those movies, and how artists had to work under the conditions of Hollywood, how they were able to make entertainment and make classics, movies that were made to last, but also able to talk about certain things and the way they did them and the way they subverted the norms and stuff. And I think this, pardon me, is a testament to him as not only a filmmaker but as someone who was a historian and educator, to make sure that visual literacy and this art form that he loves survives, because right now it's an abysmal state out there for this medium of art and entertainment. And I think if you watch that, especially if you're interested in movies and listening to Scorsese talk about movies for that amount of time, which I can listen to him read the phone book, and I would love it. But this is the perfect thing to go watch. It's hard to find, but you can watch most of it on YouTube. Yeah, it's a great piece of educational cinema.
Yeah, with that, I think it's a good time to bring in Scorsese's latest comments that we
Mm-hmm.
briefly spoke about at the beginning of the episode. Is that, recently Scorsese has been on record as, coming out. Now, this time, in the past he did, but this time he didn't directly call out comic book movies or big blockbusters. But he did talk about how now it seems the studio system is mostly attracted towards big budget, big box office draws. Like, so, i.e., your comic book movies, your massive blockbusters, your avatars, they, like, studios are really going for movies that can make $1 billion. Your Fast and the Furiouses, your big action set pieces.
Yeah,
And
your
he's really
franchisability.
right, franchises, definitely franchises.
Mm-hmm.
And Scorsese starts talking about how this has really begun for a while. It's jeopardizing the direction and the creativity of directors who want to work in the industry, who want to make certain passion projects, but they'll never get picked up because there's no franchisability for it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of what you got to from his comments recently, or you want to
Yeah, I
add to
mean,
that?
yeah, I mean, he's talking about a few things in there. I mean, it's all tied together with that. His comments about Marvel and movies as attraction rides instead of an art form, or
Right,
an
business instead of
entertainment.
art.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think he understands that there's business side to it, but I think sustainability of this business, the studio heads are gutting all of the sustainability out of it as well. They're not making smaller movies to take a chance on things, and trying to find new avenues that audiences want to see. They're not making movies for adults. They're trying to make movies that they have the biggest budgets possible, and they're trying to make the biggest profit possible. And they're really heading in a direction that, as this culture shifts, these movies are going to fail, and they're going to put themselves in a position where they can't produce movies anymore. There's a streaming side to that, which is also leveling all movies to be the same, on the same playing field, and so you don't know which ones, what's the praise for this one? What am I supposed to see? How do I find out if this one's any good? And it's just like everything is it's kind of gutted at this point. There's no tastemakers anymore, except for you're just being told by the major studios that these are the movies you should be watching because this is the only ones we're making. And there are all these big budgeted CGI fests, whether they're superhero films or Transformer movies or whatever. And I think people get up in arms when he said that those movies aren't cinema, and we can argue what that word means, but it's, for him, he's talking about a medium that uses the tools of the moving image to convey psychological and emotional human experiences on the screen, and these films don't do that. And in a large part, the other side of that is, and other filmmakers have talked about this, and even stars in these movies talk about this, is that none of these big budget movies are making movie stars out of the people in them. People aren't going to see a movie because so and so plays Captain America or the Falcon or Star-Lord or whatever superhero it is. They're going to see those characters, and so you can change the person who's playing Spider-Man 5-6 times and no one gives a shit. They're going to see Spider-Man. And so the people
Right.
playing
That's a very
them,
good
yes,
point.
yeah, they're not really, they can't go and star in another movie and then that movie's going to make back a huge profit because that star is bankable. We have very few stars who are bankable now. Your Tom Cruises and
Your Denzel Washington's, the
Denzel
Equalizer
Washington's, yeah. And so these guys
trilogy.
are, yeah, yeah. I mean, these guys are aging out too, and so there's not a
Right.
lot of younger people who are going to be able to sustain the studio system outside of an intellectual property character, and it's killing the industry. And so it's a rarity when you have a film being funded that's gonna, do something. I mean, Scorsese's in a position where he can get like his new film Killers of the Flower Moon funded because he has clout to his name, and he has Robert De Niro, who's in his 80s, and Leonardo DiCaprio, who's in his late 40s, as the stars, and they're bankable movie stars. But if he had made this film with two younger people, I mean, I don't think that he would have gotten the green light. I don't think he would have gotten the big, the ability to release a 3.5 hour movie theatrically without the star power, right? Like no one's going to want to come see them
Right.
because they don't have the
Right.
star power in them anymore. And so he's on to a lot of things. And he did say something that I thought was interesting, that if you feed people one thing and one thing only, I'm paraphrasing this because I don't know the exact phrasing he said, but they will only want more of that one thing because that's all that they know. And so the last 20 years of movies have just been conditioning, the studios have just been conditioning audiences to, this is the only type of movie that there is. And so if they see a movie that's made from a different perspective, and we've talked about many different movies on this podcast that are from weird and wild perspectives of the world, and from different regions of the world, and have different cultural or contexts and stuff, and they're not going to know what to do with it. They're going to watch it and they're going to turn it off because it's foreign to them, even if it's an American movie. But it's, it could be in black and white. It could be, if you're used to only watching movies starring robots and young people and attractive people, you're not going to want to watch a movie about people who are your parents' ages or your grandparents' age and the struggles that they're going through. So yeah, I think I 100% support the things that he's talking about, because the entire entertainment industry, or this corporatization of this industry, is really killing itself for profit, and not trying to consider any other avenues that it has.
Yeah, I mean that's why all the streaming services now are coming out with a premium tier. Like they're adding advertising into all of anything that you watch, and then you can pay a
Mm-hmm.
premium tier price to have no ads. So basically, if you have streaming right now, no ads, in order to keep that, you're going to have to pay more for it. Otherwise, you're going to have ads. So they're turning streaming back into cable television, except for
Yeah,
on demand, which we had cable on demand before. Like that's nothing new. They're
yeah.
just like you said, for profit, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they're realizing their model that they had was broken. They weren't making the profit margins that they wanted, so they're reverting to old school stuff. And I think you are right, but I do have a kind of a last question, and it's two things wrapped into one,
Mm-hmm.
but we kind of go out on this one. So one is like you said that Scorsese, he brings in people like Robert De Niro, Leonardo DiCaprio, so he can get his projects funded. That being said, I mean, he brings in Robert De Niro again. He brings in Leonardo DiCaprio again.
Mm-hmm.
Like Scorsese has a habit of using the exact same people. Oh, excuse me, time and time and time again. And you start to wonder, you're like, well, Scorsese, why? Like, are you just stuck in the past? Are you really going to put out something new with these same old people? Like is Scorsese the past? Or does he still have something left to show audiences that they haven't seen before, that audiences actually want to see? Something that we haven't seen. I mean, what do you think? Take it away.
Yeah, I think So a few different things in your question here. I think one is Scorsese's made roughly about 30 movies, and he's also made a bunch of documentaries. And out of those 30 films, he's only made 8 or 9 with De Niro. I
That's
think
almost 1/3 of them, though.
sure, but I think that there's something to mine in a collaboration between artists, someone who can match the intensity of the individual who's directing the film. And he fell in again with DiCaprio in his later films. But I can see how people get tired of seeing the same director with the same people over and over again. But I think they've been fresh enough to, at least with the De Niro films. With the DiCaprio ones, I feel a little less. There's less diversity in the roles. But with the De Niro ones, I think they were constantly pushing what they could do, going from Raging Bull to The King of Comedy, things like that, where they weren't always trying to do the same kind of film together. But as far as is Scorsese the future of cinema, I don't think so. No, he's 80 years old, but I think what value he's trying to leave or impart upon us, as he is very honest that he's not going to be here for much longer. I mean, he's in good health now, but he is in the twilight of his life. That if we don't do something to revalue cinema, then it's going to disappear, and there's not going to be anything left of it. Excuse me. And so I think with that, if you look at his new movie, I don't know how much you're following of his new movie that's coming out, which obviously I haven't seen yet, but the idea that this is an 80-year-old filmmaker making this movie that's based on a book about these killings of the Osage tribe, people who have oil in their land, and the book is from the point of view of the FBI, and so he's shown that he's someone who could still learn even at his age. Is that he didn't want to make that movie. He got into it and he was like, this movie's not going to be any different than any of the other movies I've made with DiCaprio. If it's just going to be about him being a cop trying to solve his murders. And so they flipped it, rewrote the entire film to explore the perspective of the victims of the story, the people who were being murdered, and how the Americans treated the indigenous people depicted in the story, and kind of across cinema and other art forms in general. Because I was watching an interview with him recently where he was talking about, like, as he was growing up in the 40s and 50s watching American movies, like, indigenous people weren't treated with any respect. They were treated as people who don't understand money, and they don't understand our society, and so they're treated as less than. So he really wanted to make a film that showed them as who they truly were, and with respect and in collaboration with them. And so I do think he's showing that not everyone in his everyone in his age range should stick to the same thing all the time and trying to make the same kind of movies all the time. And so he's incorporating, like, De Niro into this film as the bad guy in the film, instead of the lead of the film. And so he is, finding different ways to utilize the people in his films. But yeah, I mean, I think there are many great collaborative teams. Spike Lee and Denzel Washington were one of them. I don't know, Samuel Jackson, Quentin Tarantino, a lot of these different directing and acting duos, but Scorsese and De Niro are just one of the absolute best, and they did a lot of great things to change the course of American history. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess it just depends on the audience and whether how much mileage you get out of watching artists collaborate over multiple projects, or if you'd like to see someone mix it up a little bit. Yeah, I think it comes down to the viewer, but I think he has a lot to impart upon this new generation that should be taken as an axe to what's going on right now, and to create a revitalization of the industry. So yeah, I think he's got a lot of validity to what he's saying.
Martin Scorsese. I'll be interested when he does hang up his little director's hat or his little microphone, or little
Yeah.
funnel, whatever you used to call him back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because
The
he's been
megaphone?
at it for a while, for sure.
Yeah.
But that's it. That's your top 10 list, my friend. An excellent list indeed. But before we head out, have you got anything going on lately, Gregory Day? I know before you were doing hits for Lady. What you up to these days?
Yeah. We're gonna have to recontextualize this moving forward, but I've transitioned out of doing Hipsville AD and am now working with a few partners in a new endeavor called Gourmet Cinema Gang, which is going to be focused on hosting movie screenings here in Austin. And it's going to be sort of the spirit of Hipsville, but trying to create a community out of it and do screenings. And I'm still going to be writing on the Substack. You still find the bad.date@substack.com, where I'm going to be writing things as a little rebranded for the Gourmet Cinema Gang. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how I can take what we're doing as a community and here in Austin and bring it over to the podcast and talk to you about certain things. But yeah, you can follow us on Instagram right now. I'm trying to branch out to other social media branches or social media platforms. It's gourmet, spelled GOREMET _cinema_gang on Instagram.
I love it. I love it. Screenings out in Austin, Texas. People, if you're out in Austin, check out Gregory Day and the Gourmet Cinema Gang. And thank you so much, my friend, for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. I always dig it so much. And people, that's just a snap of what's going on in the world today.
I see.
I bring it down like.
Lofi Poli Sci is more than just me. It's the we that we be. Pickering and Day, signing off.
Ciao.